morning. It's always good to be with you all, and I'm always humbled that you ask me to come back. This has been maybe my fourth or fifth time with you all, and I love coming here because it's such a warm environment and atmosphere. And I was telling some of you beforehand, you all smile at you're to get to come. Really cool over there and doing to pray about fantastic. And me, okay? I know when God could be doing that you destroy my heart, Lord, for the beauty, you for your love. You all have been this and time. I'm hoping, anticipating by this year book really story. Um, I was reading it again. I read it a few times as I was preparing and asking God, what is it that you want me to share out of this? Because it's such a common story, and I knew that you all had lots of other speakers before me. And it's really amazing how when you read God's word over and over and over, there's something new every single time. And as I was reading it, there were just new things every time, every time. And so I'm really excited to share just what God highlighted for me. Um, and I'm just going to lay a little groundwork first for those of you who are like, where's the scripture? Why isn't she talking about Esther? I'm going to get there. But let me lay a little bit of groundwork so that it all comes together and makes sense. So, based on recent research in the last couple of years, a significant portion of Americans, about 57%, report regularly thinking about finding more meaning and purpose in their lives. And as a counselor and as a ministry director, it's one of the things that people talk about most with me. They often are trying to figure out, what is the thing God has for me? What did He make me for? What's my purpose? What's my purpose? What's my purpose? I hear that question a lot. And I have a daughter actually who's a junior right now in high school, and she's wrestling with this question as she's trying to figure out where to go to college and what she wants to study. And she keeps asking, Mom, what if I choose the wrong thing? And I keep reassuring her, you can't. You can't choose the wrong thing because God's going to use it all. He'll use every piece of it. She loves film. She's really into audio-visual and film things. She likes animation and stop motion. And she keeps saying, I just can't see how God can use that. How's He going to use stop motion? And I, again, keep reassuring her, He'll use it all. He knows how to use it. And the other day we were on a walk and she said, well, I just wish He'd show me my future. Because if I knew what He was going to have me do, I'd know what classes to take next semester. I'd know how to prepare. Do any of you ever feel that way? I know I do. There's lots of times that I'm like, God, can you just show me? Can you just give me a sign? Who has said that? Lord, just show me what it is that you have for me so that I know what to do next. In my 20s and my 30s, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what is the thing, right? Surely God has me here for this one big, significant moment. What is it, Lord? What is the one big thing? Because I too, like my daughter, wanted to make sure I was studying and I was growing and I was learning. And I was developing so that I would be ready for that big moment. Now I'm approaching my mid 40s, and I don't know, maybe it'll change again in 10 more years. But I would say today, the small stuff is all big stuff, and the big stuff is all small stuff. If that makes any sense, it fits right in line with God and how He works, right? Everything's backwards and upside down with God. The last shall be first, the first shall be last. You have to die to live, right? It fits right in line with how He works. I've come to learn that the big moment, like big, whatever that big moment is, it's only a moment. Typically, the stakes are higher. That's why we call it a big moment, because the stakes are a little bit higher around that particular event, but it's still just a moment. What makes it or breaks it, what makes it significant, are all the seemingly small things that lead up to it. And the only reason they're categorized as small is because they're typically done behind the scenes. They're the things that nobody sees. And in the moment, it feels like there's not really a great impact, like immediately. The small moments, the small experiences, the small choices, over time define the big moments when they're presented. I want you to hear that, and I want you to receive it. The small moments, the small experiences, the small choices, over time define the big moments when they're presented. And that's exactly what stood out to me as I read the book of Esther. If you've read it, what would you consider the big moment for Esther? What is it that she does? Someone just kind of shouted out. What do you think was the big moment for her? Anybody? Yeah, going before the king. Yep. When she does this great big bold thing, going before the king, and she's courageous, she puts her life on the line, and she does it to save the Jewish people. She was so courageous, and she saved an entire people group with her courage. That act, what she did, lands her in a list with lots of other famous or great biblical figures. Figures like Moses, who led the Israelites out of Egypt and through the Red Sea when it parted and through the desert, and he got the 10 Commandments. Like, he has a whole list of things on his resume. And David, who defeated Goliath, and he became a great king after God's own heart. And Daniel, who was courageous in the lion's den. Paul, Peter, Mary, Noah, Abraham, Joseph, Ruth. There's so many that we can name. And that great act, that moment that she stepped into, put her in a list among the greats in the Bible. But each of these famous characters, yes, they did great things. They did it with God's direction and guidance. But each one of those stories had a backstory. There was a lot that happened before the big moment that we think of when we hear their names. There were things that had to fall into place, things that happened to build their character, their skill set, their mindset, their faith, their trust, and their obedience in God. There were years of things that happened because those things had to be strengthened. Great big moments are the culmination of small moments, and they are what make or break those opportunities. I think sports is one of the best ways to describe what I'm trying to say here. My husband and my son are huge sports fans. Huge. They could watch sports all day long. They know all the statistics, all the players. My son's only 14, and he can give you statistics from way back, he says way back in the 1900s. But they know all the info. They study it, and they know everything. And over the years, I like the big games, right? The Super Bowl, the World Series, the big ones, the championship games, because to me those are way more fun, way more exciting. But they will watch every single game, every single one. And it blows my mind because it's so boring to me. It really is. But when you think about sports, those big moments like the championship games, the whole country's watching, maybe even the whole world, depending on what sport it is. Um, and the reason those players are there to begin with, and the reason they have the opportunity to be the champions in those games, is because of everything that happens leading up to that. I do know this about sports. I like to listen to this sports psychologist, and I've learned a ton about sports. And I will say this, sports has got it down. They've figured it out. These players run drills all the time. They're honing their craft. They're creating muscle memory. Muscle memory, remember that word. I'm going to come back to it. They create muscle memory by practicing and practicing and practicing and practicing. And they practice as if they were in the big game. Like, practice is a really, really, really big deal. Because when you practice and you create that muscle memory, when you're in the game, you're not confused. You're not trying to figure out what to do because you already know. This is why I was never very good at sports. I tried to play basketball, and they would throw me the ball, and I would panic and just like throw it back. And I would be like, don't throw me the ball. I was so offended that they would throw me the ball. I tried, when I was very young, I tried softball, t-ball probably, I don't know. And I was terrified of the ball. I was the kid that was like, they put me way out in the outfield so I could just stand there and not get hit by the ball. But it takes all of that in practice so that they're ready, right? And those games, those sports teams play all season. They have what's called regular season games, the ones I never watch. They're so boring to me. But the true sports fans love them because it says a lot about the players. They're identifying key players. It tells them if their team is going to be good or not. It's hilarious to me when my husband and my son watch the first regular season game and they're like, we're done. It's over. Season's over. Because it was all they needed to see in the first game. But they're put under tremendous pressure each week. Don't miss that part. These players are put under tremendous pressure week in and week out. And those are opportunities to grow and strengthen themselves individually and as a team. So again, while the big stage games seem like the moment, I would argue they aren't. The higher stakes moments are all of those little ones when nobody's watching. And they're practicing and they're working out and they're dieting on their special diets and they're working on recovery. All of those things are setting them up to get the job done on the big stage. So let's shift to Esther. With that groundwork, let's shift to Esther. Again, we talked about her big stage moment. She saved the lives of the Jewish people by doing a brave thing. God placed an opportunity before her, and she stepped into it by faith. And God blessed her obedience. So there's three things I said there. God placed an opportunity before her, and he places opportunities before all of us. And then what did she do? She stepped into it. She entered the opportunity, and God blessed it. He blessed her, and he blessed the Jewish people because of her obedience. But what were the small things? I just spent all this time talking about the small things. What were the small things that led to that big moment? There are really a whole lot. I'm serious. If you haven't read the story, go back and read it now with that mindset, looking for all the little things that had to fall into place. We're only going to look at a few of them just because of time constraints, but there are so many. It's really, really fascinating. We're going to think of two columns, okay, and we're going to look at some of these small things under these two columns. So one of them is God sets the stage, and the other column is Esther responds, okay? So God sets the stage. And what I want you to know under this column is God will place you right where he desires you to be. I didn't say where you desire to be. He will place you where he desires you to be. In Ephesians 2:10, it says, "For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." In Romans 8:28 it says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose." Whose purpose? Say it again. Whose purpose? Right. Our purpose. That question that everybody's asking, what's my purpose? What's my purpose? What's my purpose? Our purpose flows out of his purpose. We spend so much time seeking our purpose that we forget to seek the one who gives it to us. Don't forget to seek the one who gives it to you. Our purpose flows out of his. If you're not spending time with him, if you're not getting to know him, if you're not growing with him, it's going to be challenging to be able to identify that purpose piece because it flows through him, right? Our purpose flows out of his. And that's really, really freeing. It really is, because it means we can stop searching so hard. We need to seek wholeheartedly God's purpose so that we can step into it and we can make choices and decisions that align with it. He'll move the pieces into place. He will. Pieces you could never imagine. I look back at my own life and I look at all the things that he's put in place that I never could have imagined. Even if he said, Dee, I'm taking you here, I would not have thought to work it out the way that he worked it out. Right? I would not have thought to go through the things that he put me through. That also means I probably would have avoided a lot of things, and my muscle memory would be pretty weak when it comes to my faith. Right? Esther didn't earn or manipulate her way into the position of queen. I think that's a real important piece that stood out to me at the beginning. God clearly placed her there. What do we know about Esther before she was queen? If we look at the text, we know that she was an orphan, and we know that she was a girl, which in that time period neither of those carried really any weight, right? Esther 2:7 says, Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This young woman, who was also known as Esther, had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Mordecai had taken her in as his own daughter when her father and mother died. So that gives us a little bit of background on Esther before she was queen. So God had to move Mordecai. He had to have Mordecai in the right place at the right time so that he would take Esther in. She didn't earn it. She didn't earn being there was nothing she was doing. She was just alive. And at this point, God was moving the pieces for her. It was a gift from Mordecai out of his compassion and his love for her that he took her in as his own, and he raised her and he cared for her, and she began to know him and grow trust in him. That sounds a lot like another story. If you think of the story of God, isn't that our story with the story of God? He takes us in as his own. He adopts us as his daughters. He cares for us. He loves us with kindness and compassion, and we get the opportunity to begin to know him and trust him. Do you see the parallels? All throughout the story. All throughout the story. And in fact, you probably have heard this from one of the other speakers. This is the only book in the Bible where God's name is not mentioned. Yet he's everywhere, and you can see it right here. We can see Jesus on the pages of this part of the story. Okay, so we talked about Esther. What about Vashti? Do y'all know who she is? Who's Vashti? Right. She was the queen before Esther. Okay, so how is Esther going to become queen if Vashti's already queen? There's already someone in that position. How many times in your life have you gone, well, Lord, that it's already taken. Somebody else is already doing it. It was already taken. Vashti was already queen. How in the world was Esther going to become queen? Well, she did a bold thing as well. Vashti did. If you remember, I don't know if you all know, at the very beginning of the story, King Xerxes is having a big party, and it's going on and on and on and on, and they're drinking, the alcohol is flowing, and in a probably inebriated state, he calls for Queen Vashti to come wearing her crown. Some biblical scholars say maybe only her crown, and wants her to be paraded around so everybody can see her. But she refused. She said no. She refused to be paraded around a room of men as a trophy. Did she forfeit her position in doing that? She did. She absolutely did. But she was true to her convictions, and she maintained her dignity. And perhaps Vashti was put there at this very point in the story for such a time as this. And you're going to find that in the whole story if you go into it looking for those little things. There's this time. and this time, and this time, that God had people in a place specifically for those times. She used her voice. She said no to someone powerful who was asking her to do something that didn't feel right. She did the self-respecting thing, knowing there would be undesirable consequences. And that seemingly small act, which doesn't get a whole lot of time in the story, right? You can easily gloss over it, actually, when you're reading. But that seemingly small act set the stage for God to position Esther in a place of influence. So, God sets the stage, right? That's what God was doing at that point in the story. But Esther still had choices. Just because God sets the stage doesn't mean we have to do anything. He doesn't force us to do anything. It's always a choice. So he sets the stage, and at this point, Esther has some choices to make. So we're looking at the next column now. Esther responds. Okay? We have choices of how we will respond when God sets the stage. Always. Always. For the sake of time, I'm going to summarize Esther 4, 1-17 is the kind of the meat of the story, right? We're really building up here, but I'm just going to summarize it for you instead of reading all those scriptures. So in Esther 4, 1-17, Mordecai learns about the plot to kill the Jews. He sends word to Esther in the palace through her attendants. Esther's afraid, and she explains that she could be killed. And then Mordecai speaks truth and love to her, displaying his faith in God. Esther sends word to Mordecai, asking all the Jewish people to join her in praying and fasting for 3 days. And then she goes before the king, and she tells him of the plot to annihilate the Jews. And she saves her people. Okay, that's the summary. So let's look in a little more detail at how she responded. So first, she didn't face the challenge alone, and she didn't go in her own strength. This is really, really, really important. There's something as women, maybe not all, I'm speaking in generalities, and I know it's been true for me lots of times. We kind of just learn over the years to just suck it up, buttercup, and I'm just going to put my head down and I'm just going to go through this. And sometimes we have a hard time saying, hey, I'm having a hard time. I need some help. I don't think I can carry this. It's really hard to do. We think we can do it on our own. We think we can do it in our own strength. But that's not what we see Esther do here. So she was afraid. She says it in the story. She was afraid to be put to death. She sends word to Mordecai and says, everybody knows that if you go before the king without being summoned, he could kill you. He could put you to death. Like just a reminder in case you forgot. Right? But then Mordecai responds, and in her not doing it alone, this is an important piece. She listened to his wise counsel. We all need wise counsel, all of us. We need people who we allowed to speak into our lives, to tell us what they see. People who are older, there's this great quote, I hope I can get it right. It's always a good idea to stare into the face of people who've been staring into the face of Jesus longer than you, right? And that's what she was doing here, right? Mordecai's older, and he has a history of trustworthiness, of faithful behavior, and a history of guiding her well. So she knows that this is wise counsel, and she listens. After she listened, then she prayed and she fasted. She didn't go in her own strength. She went with the strength and the covering of the Lord. So she took everything that she knew what was going on, all the facts, all the information, and then all the counsel and all the wisdom. And she took all of that and she sat before the Lord and she prayed and she fasted for 3 days to hear from him, to prepare herself for what he was calling her to do. And she asked others to join her. We need other people in our lives who are praying for us. Prayer is so powerful and so strong, and we need other people. And she knew that, and she said, okay, I'm going to go do this and be before the Lord, but you all please join me. Everybody pray with me and for me. Okay, so she listened to wise counsel, she prayed and fasted, and she asked others to pray and fast with her. That is how she didn't go at it alone. Okay? The other piece is we see sacrificial faith with Esther. She didn't put her own life, her own well-being, and this last one, which is probably comes up for us more than the first two, or her own comfort above others. She wasn't selfish, and she wasn't self-seeking. And she didn't say, look, I'm in a pretty good place. I get beauty treatments. My hair's looking real good. My clothes are feeling pretty great. Sorry God didn't do that for y'all. I'll pray for you. She didn't do that. That wasn't her response. What she did was very reflective of what we see Jesus describe in Matthew 10:28. He says, "Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul." And Paul also reflects this in Philippians 1:21 when he says, "To live is Christ, and to die is gain." She showed sacrificial faith. And lastly, she exercised the faith muscles that she had. Now remember, she was still very young. She was probably in her 20s, maybe, I don't know, maybe even late teens. I don't really know. But she was very young. And yet, when she responded, when she went before the king, she wasn't rash. She wasn't emotionally charged. She wasn't reactive. She didn't storm in there. She wasn't screaming and yelling. She didn't demand that the king do anything. She listened. She contemplated. She prayed and fasted. And with God's leading, she devised a well-developed, well-thought-out plan. And then she did it. She exercised the faith muscles that she had. We can see Mordecai's faith muscles. He has very well-developed ones. He refused to bow down to Haman, regardless of the consequences. He sent word to the king about the plot to kill him. He spoke to Esther very truthfully in Esther 4:14 when he said, "If you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise. It will come for the Jews from another place." That statement right there shows Mordecai's trust was in the faithfulness of God and not in a person. His faithfulness wasn't in Esther. His faithfulness was in God, because he'd already seen God come through over and over and over and over. So he wasn't concerned in that sense. He knew God was going to save his people. What he was saying was, Esther, God's doing a thing, and he's doing it now. And you have the opportunity to step into that and be part of it. Or not. It's going to happen either way. But don't think that if you're quiet and you don't say anything, you're going to be saved. God will save his people, yet you may perish. Right? We see his faith muscles in action. She's young and she's still growing hers, but she exercised the ones she had. In our church, we often say, do what you know to do. Because we'll hear people say, well, I've not been a Christian that long, or I don't know the Bible that well, and we always say, just do what you know to do. Do the next thing. Do the one thing God has taught you. Share the one experience you have had with Jesus. Do the next thing that you know to do. Each moment for Esther, going to the castle for the beauty treatments, that would have been a little scary. I mean, sounds cool when we read about it, but she was leaving the only home she knew. And it wasn't really a choice, like she was taken there. I would have been a little scared, like what are they going to do to me? What's happening, right? So she went for the beauty treatments. She went before the king when he chose her as queen. She listened to Mordecai's counsel. She prayed, she fasted, she did what the Lord told her to do. And the big moment was going before King Xerxes without being called, and then telling him about the plot to kill the Jews. And her courage saved her people. That only happens because she kept showing up for practice and growing her faith muscles and her muscle memory. God set the stage. Esther responded. So how about you? How's God setting the stage in your life right now? Really think about that. Really think about that question. How is he setting the stage in your life right now? even right now, where you are, right now where you're sitting, at the table that you're at with the women that are sitting there with you, right in this moment. How is God setting the stage? What seemingly small things is He positioning you to participate in, even at this moment? Remember, the small things are all big. What feels really small to you? Maybe what's the thing that, like, you've been praying for this thing and God's telling you to do something else and you're going, but I don't want to do that. That's kind of boring. That's not as much fun. Nobody's going to know I did that. What are those things? My challenge to you is this. It's the same challenge that Mordecai gave Esther. Show up. Show up for practice. All the small moments. Show up for practice and grow your faith muscle memory. Each and every moment of each and every day, be present enough to show up for the small moments. Be present. Be present. Our culture is struggling with that right now. Be present. Be here. Be right now. Stop thinking about what's coming up later. Stop thinking about what happened yesterday. Be right here. Be right now. Be in the moment and say, Lord, what are you asking of me right now? What are you asking of me in this moment, in the line at the grocery store? What are you asking of me in the line to pick up my kids at school? What are you asking of me doing this tedious job at work? What are you asking? But you have to be present. You have to be present in each moment. Those might be showing love to a child and building healthy attachment in them, if you're a mom. That's a really big thing, that has generational impact. Sitting with a friend who's grieving, holding the hand of an aging parent and showing gratitude and honor, speaking up for someone, advocating for someone, sharing what Christ has done for you. Don't get so caught up in looking for the big thing God's asking you to do that you miss the small but significant and vastly important moments. Learn to ask, Lord, what are you asking of me in this moment? And this moment? And this moment? Who knows? Who knows? Who knows whether you have not been placed right where you are for such a time as this? Thank you, ladies.